Hello, and welcome to the Ultimate Strategy Podcast, your go-to podcast for everything strategy. Each week, we share a new episode covering a wide range of topics designed to help your business grow smarter by making strategy both approachable and actionable. I'm Laura Blackmore, Head of Strategy Execution, and I'm very excited to welcome our guest today. Before we dive in, I'm going to thank today's sponsor, Cascade. Cascade is the #1 strategy execution platform. Today, we have the huge privilege of introducing Alex Brueckmann, an internationally renowned strategy expert and CEO of Brueckmann Strategy Consultants. With a rich background that spans from media to management, Alex has dedicated his career to helping leaders crystallize their organizational identity. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that in a moment. Alex is the architect behind an incredible framework called the 9 Elements of Organizational Identity. He'll refer to it as the 9 EOI, if I'm not mistaken, framework, a transformative approach that enables leaders to master the art and science of strategy. And I'm excited to be digging into that today. And also your insights, Alex, which I'm really keen to hear about, are encapsulated in your Wall Street Journal best-selling book. So huge welcome to you today. Do you want to say a few words and introduce yourself and your background and how you've come on this journey? Why are you here talking about strategy?
Thanks for having me, Laura. Much appreciated. Thanks for the warm intro. My background is in the media industry. Originally, I started out in radio journalism. I later went to business school and went back into the media industry, but this time not on the content creator side, but more on the management side. And over the years, I was thrown into strategy. So in business school, strategy was actually not my most favorite subject, believe it or not. I was more into let's say, the colorful things like marketing. But over time, shortly after business school, I had the opportunity to support a CEO in their quest to transform a very traditional organization. And strategy was a huge part of that. And when he asked me whether I would like to become his strategy manager, I said yes. And it all went, uphill from there, I would say. It was an amazing learning journey for me. I later transitioned into management consulting and then eventually started my own companies.
Amazing. I feel like everyone says they were just thrown into strategy, either that or they studied it very hard and they become an expert. But tell me how you got from there to becoming an author, a best-selling author.
Well, I mean, there are almost 20 years between those events, between thrown into strategy and then writing down the 9 elements framework. I've been in strategy consulting and executive development for almost 2 decades now. And over time, you see your clients struggle with the same issues over and over again. Like if you're long enough in an industry, if you're long enough working on certain topics, they kind of come and go, and you see similarities where you wouldn't expect them. Like leadership issues appear regardless of the industry you're in. Strategy issues, the same. So at some point you need to ask yourself, why am I running into the same walls over and over again, even though the entire context is very different? And then you realize, okay, strategy hasn't worked for those clients in those particular circumstances, and you start to dig deeper. What are the root causes? And you realize the strategy wasn't the problem. The strategy actually was pretty sound. The problem was, for example, that leaders did not know how to translate it into action, did not know how to lead through transformation, did not know how to make it relevant for their people. So it's a capability piece that was missing. It's a pure, how do I actually do this stuff as a leader? And those problems are often even amplified when organizations work with external consultants that give their clients 400 PowerPoint slides and call that a strategy, which
We've all seen it.
Exactly. Everyone who's been around long enough has felt that pain. And other examples then include a disconnect between what the strategy says, what the priorities are, what the choices are that you make as an organization, and how you then translate that into your culture. And when I say culture, I mean performance culture. How do you enable people with the right skills? How do you link their individual targets to the strategy? How do you make their work relevant and matter? And how do you make individual contribution visible? So if all these things are not in place, you on paper, you can have the best strategy in the world, but you won't see much of a result.
I love that. And I guess why don't you tell us a little bit about the framework? Like what are the core concepts and how does that I think what you're saying is often it's not about sort of the magic of the strategy, it's actually like the enablement of the people. How does the framework sort of feed into that?
So when I wrote the strategy legacy, I started to figure out a few things relatively early in the writing process where I realized, yep, that absolutely makes sense. I've done this 100 times. This is definitely one of the issues that a framework needs to address. And other topics came during the writing process when I realized there is something missing. My experience tells me that there was also something in that space. So I started to dig into what I thought that space was. And at the end, when I look back, I had a model that I didn't like. It was convoluted. So I needed to clean it up. And what I realized when I took a look at it and discussed it with colleagues was that we're basically talking about three essential topics. And we put them into rings, into circles, concentric circles, and formed the model that basically consists of a cultural circle in the center, a strategy circle around that, and a leadership circle around that, which basically means you need to integrate your culture, the way you lead an organization, and the strategy as such. So when you take a look at that cultural circle, basically the fundament that you need to build for any strategy to work, you're really talking about what does your, it's kind of, I talk a lot in questions because that's how I address topics with my clients. So some of the questions that I help them to answer is, what do we do and for whom? Like really basic questions. And some call that a mission statement, like in the purest sense of the word. What do you do and for whom? And you would not believe how often that question leads to hours long conversations and discussions where you would expect that it's relatively clear what you do, right? And for whom and what the value is that you bring and all these questions. So getting that clear is super important in the beginning. Also, what are your non-negotiable values as an organization? What are you willing to get punished for? What are the values that you uphold, and how do you drive them into your business in the way that you collaborate internally with your clients, with suppliers, like those more cultural elements. And if you're really serious about it, you would also answer the question, like a lot of people have been talking about purpose for at least 20 years, and I always found that interesting but not very intriguing, to be honest, because purpose is for me an intent. Intents are important, but what you do with that intent is even more important. So the question that I ask is not what is your purpose, like in the sense of what is the issue out there in the world that you might be uniquely positioned to address or even solve. I help my clients answer that question, but then I ask them, okay, and what is the impact of that? If you live up to that, what is the impact for your clients? What are they able to do? What is the problem that you solve for them? And what are they then able to do that they otherwise wouldn't? And once you've answered those questions, you can then go into that strategy circle, because in the end, a strategy is a vehicle that turns your purpose into tangible impact. And once you understand that and internalize that, strategy loses all its fluff. It is very, very specific of what you then want to do. And in that strategy circle, you basically have three elements. You have your vision. It is a description of what your organization will look like in a time frame that you define. That could be 12, 18 months. It could be 3 to 5 years. That heavily depends on you. It also depends on your industry, investment cycles, and all these things, right? And then you want to understand, how do we actually reach that vision? How do we make that progress measurable? So you really want to put numbers to that. And those numbers they are derived from your vision. It's not something that an external consultant can tell you. It's not something that you be like, yeah, we want such and such market share in industry X. why? Why does that matter, right? So we help our clients understand that those numbers, just because they can measure them, they might not even have any meaning. So really focusing on what that vision is and how you measure progress toward the vision, and then understanding what the big priorities therefore need to be to move that strategy or that company closer to the vision. And that's in the end what you call a strategy. The choices that you make to win, in the words of Roger Martin, or in my words, the priorities that help you achieve your vision. And in order to do all that, right, you need certain capabilities as an organization, but also as individuals. And that's where we move then into that leadership circle, in that outer circle, that I often call a scaffolding around the culture and the strategy. So you enable the people with the right skills, with the right capabilities. You link their individual performance to the desired culture and the strategy that you want to build, to make contribution visible and to help people see how their work actually matters. That's an essential component in helping people emotionally and rationally embrace change that comes with a new strategy. And
I
then
always
in the
call it
end, we're
like
also talking.
that intrinsic
Go ahead.
motivation. I always
Yeah,
talk about like
absolutely.
that intrinsic. People have to have that,
Exactly.
unfortunately or
Exactly.
fortunately.
And then the final element basically is management systems. Like, how do you set up your organization in ways that it supports you in achieving your vision, in putting your strategy into action? And that's meeting cadences, the whole governance topic around strategy, but also simple things like aligning your incentive structure to the strategy and the culture that you want to see. Those things. That's a quick run through the 9 elements.
I love that. It's super interesting. It's very, very aligned to, I guess, how we think about the journey at Cascade. But we definitely see it as more like a linear process than this circular motion. And I think what you've really been able to encapsulate is like you work from the middle and you can't really skip any steps. And that enables you to then like kind of move into the next circle. What would you say, with the organizations that you've worked with, how long does this entire process typically take? Like if our listeners are listening now thinking, oh my God, like we're at the beginning of the circle, we don't have a mission, we don't have a purpose, we don't really have values, or we have values, but people aren't living the behaviors of the values.
Yeah.
How long can it realistically take to get all of these things in motion in a good
The
way?
good thing is most organizations that approach us, they have something in place. Something is there. Maybe not
Yeah.
to 100%, but they have something we can build on or build off of. And you need to think about that whole model as kind of a puzzle, a jigsaw puzzle in the end. It doesn't even matter where you start. You can start in the strategy circle, you can start in the leadership circle, but eventually you need all puzzle pieces for that whole thing to make sense for you. If you leave one thing out, you can always do that. Like often budgets or timelines are the reason why we can't support a client through all 9 elements, which is fine. And we need to work around that. We also raise flags early on and say, if you skip that piece, at some point we will have to come back to it, because it will simply not, it will just raise questions if you don't have them. Questions, especially for your people that need to make decisions on a daily basis to move your strategy into action and to serve your clients. And if, for example, your whole set of values isn't clear, that might lead to certain confusion and discussions down the line. The process typically does not take as long as people would originally think. So when we talk about Fortune 50 organizations, we often have that process within 6 to 9 months, simply because of the number of stakeholders that are involved and the numbers of discussions and meetings that you need to bring everyone on board that you want to bring on board. When we work with smaller organizations, let's say somewhere in the ballpark of 100 million turnover, those processes are typically relatively quick. Like we're talking 3 to 4 to 5 months maybe to address all of these 9 elements and to be sure we have that jigsaw puzzle fully figured out. It's often surprising to clients how fast they can achieve results when they have the right partner. And I'm not kind of advertising our company here. There are many other great strategy facilitators out there. The point is, use those resources, bring someone in that guides you through that process, that has done that multiple times and can guide you early on without telling you what to do. A good facilitator doesn't come in and tell you how your strategy should look like. They ask the right questions to help you figure that out.
Okay. Now I'm seeing it as, because I think originally when you were talking about it, it's like you kind of work through the circles and you shouldn't skip anything. But actually, what you're saying is you kind of need all of the puzzle pieces eventually. And of course, if you do it all quickly, you get greater results, presumably. But actually, you can chip away at them. Basically, you can build the momentum on those pieces
Yeah,
as time goes by.
we train leaders in using that framework. So we have open enrollment courses where we help leaders understand that framework. And very often we would have 2 or 3 founders in these open enrollment programs because they want to do that right from the beginning. And they would start to work from the center outwards. And obviously, if you just start your company, you have a unique opportunity. Let's face it, that's not the reality of most companies out there. You don't have the opportunity to start on a green field. You need to work with what you have, and then you start to build it out. You lift one stone, you'll be like, oh, I'm not going there right now. You put the stone back down and maybe start somewhere else. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But over
Yeah.
time, you need to address all of these elements.
Yeah. I like that. Actually, one thing that I think personally I see business struggling with the most, or my experience with organizations, and it doesn't matter the industry or the size, but it's that really key element. I think you talked about it as being like the leadership, the management systems, the governance, the cadences, all of that. How you sort of track and report on the strategy and what that looks like in terms of individual performance as well. I think that for me is almost like the missing puzzle piece. And you can have everything else in place. You can have a great strategy, you can have great values, you can have great people. But at the end of the day, if you don't make room for those moments to talk about the strategy and have the incentives for that to be in place,
Yeah.
it all comes crashing down eventually. Because at the end of the day, if we talk about a tool, let's talk about Cascade, for example. I'm not going to be really that motivated to go into a tool and make updates if no one's actually going to be looking at them. And I'm not that motivated to keep my strategy up to date if I don't have any regular meetings to talk about my strategy. And so that is something that I think is often overlooked as a real critical step. And obviously the governance and the cadence looks a bit different for different industries. The pace, obviously the organizational structure, that does look a little bit different. But at the end of the day, it's like getting that regular moment. What do you normally, or what would you normally advise for that? Is it like just get a monthly meeting in and just have the difficult conversations? Is that where you might start?
So first of all, I think you're spot on. What you just described is exactly that leadership circle, the outer circle in the model. You can have the greatest culture and the greatest strategy on paper. It is what you do on a daily basis that either helps you excel or that will kind of leave your culture and your strategy hanging, and then people will just find work that they think is important. When it comes to governance, when it comes to management systems, what we typically do is we help leaders understand that it is all about having the right conversations with their people. We call this strategic dialogues. And you, as a leader, need certain skills, certain conversation skills, communication skills to have those conversations. And you need to be able to move your ego aside and be like, okay, I'm going to have this conversation about strategy from the perspective of how I understand it right now. I know already if I go into this conversation with my team, they will ask questions that I will not be able to answer. Now, at this point, a lot of leaders say, I don't want to look weak. I don't want to have these conversations because if they ask questions that I cannot answer, I just don't want to go there. It does not make me feel good.
Yeah.
Huge issue, because that's when strategies simply stall and fall out of the sky, right? So we help leaders understand and prepare them for these conversations, prepare them for the emotions that they will go through, and help them deal with those before they actually have these conversations. So that's one thing, having these dialogues up and down the organization to make strategy a topic for everyone every day. Those questions that you get asked in those conversations are some of the most powerful questions for successful strategy implementation, because if you can answer those questions, maybe not on the spot, but you can bring them back to your strategy team. You can say, that's the questions that we get. We need to help our people understand them. Otherwise, they cannot fully buy into this, or it will always be kind of a roadblock for them. If you manage that, you create interest within the organization around strategy, around culture. And that is something that is super important. And in addition to that, obviously, you need the hard governance structure. You need your strategy PMO, project management office. You need your, for example, a tool like Cascade that helps you visualize outcomes, that helps you individualize contribution, that helps you create collaboration that otherwise would be more difficult to achieve. Like, all these things are super important. When it comes to the hard governance structure, I often talk about different governance bodies that you need. It depends on the size of your organization, of course. Smaller organizations need less because those are the same people anyway that sit on these bodies. But if you go into a larger organization, you should obviously regularly review whether your strategy is still the right one, right? Mm-hmm. So you do that multiple times a year, potentially more often in the beginning than maybe later down the line, depending on the environment you're in. If it's highly dynamic, you should do that more often. If you are in an industry that is more stable, you might want to meet at least 2 or 3 times a year to discuss that. And also, another governance body needs to drive strategy implementation, right? So those are not the same people necessarily. Coming together, asking yourself, are those big work streams that we decided as our priorities, are they on track? If not, how can we pool resources so that everyone in the organization that can contribute to a certain topic will contribute to a certain topic? We're breaking up silos. We're breaking up departmental thinking, because strategy doesn't care about departments or about reporting lines, right? So we want everyone to understand what their contribution looks like. And this is an us thing. It's not a, let those in sales deal with that, or that's the finance guy's problem. That's a kind of mindset that we help organizations get rid of through the right cadence of meetings, through the right capabilities that we build with them. And eventually they see momentum build, and that's where you want to be. And when the momentum is there, things start to keep rolling easier than in the beginning. But starting to move that thing is always a bit of a struggle in the beginning. And it would not be right to tell people that's an easy job. But if you do a few things based on experience that we know will start to move the wheel, then you can leverage the capabilities in your organization in an entirely different way than before. And you would not believe how people can fall in love with strategy and with their part of how they contribute. And then all of a sudden, you have an organization that is like, I really like that thing. I don't understand it fully yet, but I know what I can contribute.
I want to.
They are on board.
I love that. It's funny. You used almost the exact phrase as an organization I just started working with. And the CEO was like, I want people to fall in love with their KPIs. And I absolutely laughed my head off, because I was like, that is just not something you hear every day. But like you said, you want people to fall in love with the process, because at the end of the day, strategy is the everyday. It's what they're working on all the time, and it should guide them. But it's definitely a topic that has been misconstrued. It's, only experts can talk about strategy. It's very complicated. It's not really. There are some, basics and some things that, of course, like that you do and that we do to help people get better at it. But it doesn't need to be this complex beast, and it doesn't need to be something that feels out of touch for a lot of people. And it sounds like we're both working towards that same place together, which is really nice. Thank you so much, Alex. I'd love to wrap up with a key takeaway for our listeners today. What's the one thing when they finish this podcast that they can go and put in place today in their organization, regardless of what role they're in? What advice would you give them that they can go and put in place, put into motion?
I would start by taking stock, like taking the 9 elements, and ask yourself, without any fluff, without rose glasses on, how we're doing. Like, do we have clearly defined values, and do we live those on a daily basis? Or are they just fluffy, nice words? Are we clear who our customer is, what they buy from us, and why they buy from us? So what is the value that we deliver to them? Is that really clear to everyone in the organization? Do we know what the big priorities are, the handful of priorities that will drive us to our vision? Are those written down? And does everyone understand how they are individually contributing? do our management systems support that? Like those simple questions, just taking stock and figuring out where we are, is the starting point of great conversations.
I love that. Thank you so much. I think it definitely it's definitely left me with some questions that I want answering, even for my own organization, but even thinking about the organizations that I'm working with, are they asking themselves those questions? So thank you so much. This has been very invigorating. I'm very excited to read your book as well, or one of your books, because I know you have a couple of them. I'm very intrigued now to give those a read. So thank you so much for being a guest today. I've really, really enjoyed it. And thank you for everybody listening to this week's topic. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Let us know in the comments what you're going to do next in your organization and what else you want to hear from us as well. And don't forget to subscribe to the Ultimate Strategy Podcast on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, great strategies are only as good as their execution. Thank you so much, Alex, and we will talk again soon. Thank you all.